over 4 years, more than 1,000 days of war. And by any measure, what Russia has lost in Ukraine isn't just soldiers, it's steel. Thousands upon thousands of tanks destroyed, abandoned, captured, or burned. The numbers are genuinely staggering. But here's the part nobody's talking about. Russia may actually be fielding more tanks today than when this war started. That sounds like it should terrify Ukraine. It doesn't, and the reason why tells you everything about how warfare just changed forever. Let's start with what we can actually verify. Oryx, the open-source intelligence project that only counts losses it can confirm with photo or video evidence, has documented roughly 4,400 Russian tanks destroyed, damaged, abandoned, or captured between February 2022 and June 2026. That's the conservative floor. A secondary analysis suggests that visual confirmation only captures somewhere between 50 and 70% of actual losses, which would push the real figure to somewhere between 6,300 and 8,800 tanks. Ukraine's own general staff claims north of 10,000. That's the ceiling. Take it for what it is, a government with every incentive to make its enemy look weak. But split the difference, and the conclusion is the same. At minimum, Russia has lost the equivalent of its entire pre-war active fleet. Probably twice that. The International Institute for Strategic Studies put Russia's active tank strength at around 3,000 when the invasion began. In just the first 13 months, February 2022 to March 2023, Russia lost nearly 1,900 of those. More than half the standing fleet is gone in a year. So how is Russia still in this fight? How does it possibly have more tanks now than before? 2 words: Soviet stockpiles. When the Red Army collapsed in 1991, it didn't just disappear, it parked. Thousands of tanks were mothballed across Russia, sitting in vast open-air graveyards, maintained just enough to not completely rot. The IISS estimated as many as 9,000 tanks in reserve. Some analysts suggested the number had 5 figures. An OSINT researcher named John P. used satellite imagery to count a more conservative 7,342. That's the reserve Russia cracked open. The math works like this. New production from Russia's primary tank factory, Uralvagonzavod in Nizhny Tagil, runs at roughly 250 T-90M per year. The Omsk plant adds another 150 modernized T-80S, that's 400 new tanks annually, against losses that at times averaged 85 per month. So Russia did what empires do. When they're desperate, they went to the graveyard. Old Soviet hulls, some dating back to the early 1970s, were hauled out, stripped down, fitted with fresh optics, new radios, and reactive armor bolted onto the sides, and pushed back to the front. Not new tanks, resurrected ones, and then it got almost surreal. Russia eventually worked through the easier restorations and reached the bottom of the pile, roughly 1,000 T-72. As from the early 1970s, with engines so degraded they were considered dead. In September 2024, an industry rep told the Russian State Duma that Moscow had launched what they called a regeneration program, essentially rebuilding engines from scratch on machines that had been written off as scrap metal. The program was only expected to yield around 100 working engines, about 10% of those stored hulks. So in December 2024, Russia doubled down again. A different plant signed a contract to refurbish a second engine type that also fits the T-72A. Russia was so committed to putting 50-year-old tanks back on the road that it built an entire industrial program to resurrect dead engines. Let's do the full accounting, because this is where the story gets interesting. Russia started with 3,000 active tanks. It lost somewhere between 4,400 confirmed and possibly 6,000 in reality. New production added roughly 1,600 modern vehicles. Storage drawdown likely yielded around 5,000 recoverable hulls after subtracting those rusted beyond saving. Add it all up, and Russia's ground forces may currently be fielding somewhere between 3,600 and 5,200 tanks, with the upper figure representing almost twice the pre-war force. On paper, Russia rebuilt its armored force and made it bigger. The catch? That force is now increasingly made of museum pieces. Not all tanks are created equal, and Russia's current lineup tells you everything about a military scraping backward through history just to keep its formations full. The workhorse is the T-72. First produced in 1972, it was designed to be cheap, simple, rugged, and buildable by the tens of thousands, the armored AK-47. It's everywhere in this war, on both sides. Ukraine inherited huge numbers of them too. The modern frontline versions, the T-72 and the upgraded B-3M, are the backbone of Russia's assault. But the T-72 is also the tank that became infamous for a very specific kind of destruction. By Oryx's count, Russia has lost over 1,800 T-72s more than any other single type. The reason for that is baked into the design, and we'll come back to it. Next is the T-80. Introduced in 1976, it was the world's first mass-produced tank with a gas turbine engine, the same principle as a helicopter or jet, which made it blistering fast for its size, capable of hitting 40 miles per hour across open country. The Soviets and later Russians built somewhere between 5,400 and 5,500 of them. In Ukraine, the T-80 has been ground down relentlessly. By late 2024, open-source tracking had confirmed at least 1,000 T-80S destroyed or captured. Russian tank crews reportedly gave it a grim nickname, the Steel Coffin, after watching too many turrets disappear in a single violent instant. At the top sits the T-90M Prorov, the tank Putin's propaganda machine likes to call one of the best in the world. It's the closest Russia has to a truly modern combat vehicle, with better fire control, advanced reactive armor, and targeting systems that approach Western standards. And it's still dying in embarrassing numbers. Oryx counts over 220 T-90 variants lost as of June 2026, including at least 155 of the premium T-90M model. Russia is believed to have started the war with fewer than 70 T-90 Ms. It's already lost more than twice that many. So when you hear claims of 250 rolling off the production line per year, factor in that propaganda machine. And then, when even the T-72 stockpile started running thin, Russia went further back. The T-62, entering service in 1961, the T-55, whose design heritage traces back to the immediate post-war Soviet programs. Seeing T-55S rumble toward the front in the 2020s was, for many analysts, the single clearest signal of desperation. A tank from 1946 can still kill you. But it's not going to win a modern war, and Russia knows it. Which brings us to the tank that was supposed to change everything and became one of the most expensive non-events in modern military history. The T-14 Armata. When Russia first rolled it through Red Square in 2015, the world paid attention. Unmanned turret, protected crew capsule, an active protection system designed to shoot incoming missiles out of the air, a design explicitly built to beat Western contemporaries. In the largest tank war of the 21st century, where Russia has been desperate enough to field machines from the 1940s, the Armata has been almost completely absent. It appeared briefly in 2023, reportedly used only in a rear area indirect fire role, and was quietly withdrawn within a month. The official excuse was cost. Reports put the unit price between $5 million and $9 million. That's far too expensive for a war that's consuming vehicles at this rate, and it runs on a production line that can't be shared with older models. But here's the more interesting reading. The Armata isn't really a design failure, it's a casualty of timing. It's a superb tank delivered into a war that no longer rewards superb tanks. Because in an era where a $1,000 drone can disable a multi-million-dollar vehicle, the math just doesn't work anymore. So we've established that Russia rebuilt a massive fleet and it keeps losing vehicles at a brutal rate. Why? The answer comes in three distinct layers. Layer 1, the jack-in-the-box. If you've watched enough footage from this war, you've seen it. A Russian tank takes a hit. There's a flash, and then the entire turret, all several tons of it, is hurled dozens of feet into the air. This isn't random, it's physics baked into the design. Russian tanks use an autoloader instead of a human crew member, which lets them run with 3 men instead of 4 and sit lower and smaller on the battlefield. To feed that autoloader, the tank stores roughly 20 ready rounds in a carousel ring at the base of the turret, directly surrounding the crew. When a penetrating hit reaches that ring, even one propellant charge, it can trigger a chain detonation of the entire stockpile. The pressure has nowhere to go but up. The turret goes with it. Compare that to an American M1 Abrams, which stores its ammunition in a separate rear compartment, sealed from the crew by an armored door and fitted with blowout panels. When that compartment is hit, the explosion vents up and away. Crews have survived ammunition fires that would have instantly killed a Russian crew. The Soviet designers weren't stupid, it was a deliberate trade-off. Accept the catastrophic failure mode in exchange for a smaller, lighter, cheaper, more producible tank. For the kind of war they envisioned, a fast, overwhelming continental clash, it was arguably rational. The problem is, this isn't that war. Layer 2. The human factor. The clearest case study is the opening drive on Kyiv. Russia sent long, armored columns racing down predictable highways, chronically short of fuel and more critically short of infantry. A tank, for all its armor and firepower, is essentially blind and deaf at close range. It has terrible visibility to its sides and rear. In forests, towns, and villages, it's dangerously vulnerable to anyone who can get close. The job of screening infantry is to flush out ambushes before they spring. Russia didn't bring enough of them. The Modern War Institute drew a direct comparison to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where Egyptian and Syrian infantry teams with wire-guided missiles devastated unsupported Israeli tanks in nearly identical fashion. Small Ukrainian infantry teams armed with modern anti-tank missiles and drones picked Russian columns apart, columns that had no business advancing the way they did. The terrain was muddy, the roads were choke points, and then because Russia hadn't prepared for a drawn-out campaign, they ran out of fuel. That famous 40-kilometer convoy north of Kyiv didn't get ambushed, it just stopped and sat there. Layer 3. In the early months of the war, the symbols of Ukrainian resistance were the American Javelin and British NLAW shoulder-fired missiles that went viral as David versus Goliath weapons. In 2025, those missiles were almost a sideshow. Ukrainian and independent analysts now credit FPV drones with roughly 65% of confirmed Russian tank kills. And the scale of drone production is almost incomprehensible. According to Ukraine's National Security Council, the country's defense industry reached capacity to produce more than 8 million FPV drones per year by 2026 across more than 160 companies, ranging from large factories to garage startups. Whatever the precise figure, the order of magnitude says everything. The front line is now permanently saturated with cheap flying bombs hunting anything that moves. A tank commander no longer only has to worry about the ambush team he might stumble into, he has to watch the sky constantly for every meter of advance. Both sides tried to fight back, and the results ranged from clever to genuinely absurd. Russia's first response was electronic warfare jammers that sever the radio link between an FPV drone and its pilot, sending it tumbling harmlessly. For a while it worked. Then Ukraine started using fiber optic drones. Instead of a radio signal, these machines trail an impossibly thin cable as they fly, keeping a physical connection to the pilot that no jammer can touch. Russia reportedly fielded these first in spring 2024. Ukraine rapidly matched them. The cable now litters the battlefield, tangled in trees, fences, and reportedly even bird nests. When electronic defenses failed, Russia turned to physical armor. It started in 2022 with what soldiers mockingly called cope cages, crude metal slat structures welded over tank turrets to catch grenades dropped by small drones. By early 2024, turtle tanks appeared, entire vehicles encased in welded sheet metal shells with just a gun poking out of a crude metal box. Later that year, metal spines were added to the shells, porcupine tanks designed to snag and detonate drones before they reached the hull. In 2025, those spines had evolved into thousands of fine metal hairs, unwound aluminum cable draped over the vehicle like a shaggy coat. Observers started calling them hedgehog tanks. The most heavily protected versions could reportedly absorb a dozen FPV strikes before finally going down. So what is Russia actually doing with this enormous rebuilt fleet it can barely deploy? The most generous interpretation, Russia is playing a long game. Moscow is betting that some breakthrough counter-drone technology will emerge better jamming interceptors, directed energy that eventually reopens the battlefield to fast mechanized warfare. In the meantime, preserve the fleet. Keep it ready. Russia didn't just lose tanks in Ukraine, it burned through the entire industrial inheritance of a superpower, and when the storage yards are empty, there's no going back to refill them. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to subscribe. We cover the most important military developments happening right now with the numbers and context the headlines skip.